I believe the sun will shine again, and the loneliness someday will end. I will stand right here till your voice I hear, forever and always. Good morning and welcome back to your spiritual sports segment on Rema Gospel Radio. Better than when you heard it yesterday. Let's go. The March Madness dust has settled and the Sweet 16 for the men are set to commence on Thursday for round 1 as number 1 seeded Syracuse face off against 4th seeded Wisconsin. Number 1 seed Michigan State takes on 4th seeded Louisville. 2nd seeded Ohio State match up against 6th seeded Cincinnati, and 3rd seeded Marquette battle 7th seeded Florida. And on Friday, 3rd seeded Baylor goes up against 10th seeded Xavier, while number 1 North Carolina is pitted against 13th seeded Ohio U, which is the highest seed remaining in the tournament. Number 1 seeded Kentucky balls against 4th seeded Indiana, and 2nd seeded Kansas will play 11th seeded North Carolina State. While the Sweet 16 will take place later this week, the second round of the NIT for the men took place last night as number 1 seeded Tennessee was upset by 4th seeded Middle Tennessee 71-64 with 20 points from Bruce Massey, and he also pulled down 10 rebounds for good measure. 2nd seeded Miami was upset and pummeled by 6th seeded Minnesota 78-60 as Rodney Williams put up a game high of 21 points. And 3rd seeded Stanford had an overtime thriller as they got past 7th seeded Illinois State 92-88 as Andrew Zimmerman was on fire with 29 points off the bench. The college basketball invitation for the men was also held last night as Princeton was outplayed by Pittsburgh 82-61. Butler cruised to a win over Pennsylvania 63-53. TCU was put to sleep by Oregon State 101-81, and Wyoming was blasted by Washington State 61-41 with 25 points from Brock Mouton. The second round for the women's NCAA tournament kicked off last night with 8 games on tap as number 1 seeded UConn literally spanked and packed 8 seeded Kansas State bags for them and sent them back to where they came from with a score of 72-26. I repeat, 72-26. 2nd seeded Maryland got past 7th seeded Louisville 72-68. Number 1 seeded Stanford demolished 8th seeded West Virginia 72-55. 4th seeded Purdue lost against 5th seeded South Carolina 72-61, while 3rd seeded and defending champion Texas A&M continued the defense of their championship by beating 6th seeded Arkansas 61-59. 2nd seeded Tennessee dominated 7th seeded DePaul 63-48. 3rd seeded Miami was upset by 11th seeded Gonzaga 65-54, and 2nd seeded Kentucky narrowly escaped an upset by defeating 7th seeded Green Bay 65-62. And the second wave of the second round will play on Tuesday. The National Invitational Tournament's second round for the women was in full effect last night as Richmond was crushed by Virginia 68-55. Syracuse mollywopped Drexel 65-43. Cincinnati was pounded by Toledo 72-51, and Colorado easily handled South Dakota 64-55. In breaking news yesterday afternoon, as I reported on my Twitter account at CEEJAY Sports, Peyton Manning instructed his agent Tom Condon to open negotiations with the Denver Broncos to become their next starting quarterback. Manning informed other teams such as the Tennessee Titans and the San Francisco 49ers that he would not be joining their organization. As for the status of current Bronco quarterback Tim Tebow, sources say he will be traded once the Manning deal is complete. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and YouTube at CEEJAY Sports, and stay tuned for more updates in your next spiritual sports segment where we sprinkle a little spirituality in your sports. I'm CJ. Be blessed and keep smiling because you look better when you do.